All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our first March USAFA LitWork Space Law webinar. Very special webinar for you all today. We are featuring none other than Lieutenant General Jeffrey Rockwell, the Judge Advocate General of the U.S. Department of the Air Force. I'll just run through a brief introduction of Lieutenant General Rockwell, and then, sir, I'll turn it over to you for opening remarks. And then we can kick off with our fireside chat of questioning. Lieutenant General Rockwell has been a serving active duty Air Force Judge Advocate since he entered active duty under the Direct Appointment Program in 1987. He's had a long and illustrious career in the JAG Corps, including, as you saw through my invitation email, a long history of work in the space domain. He received his LLM degree in Air and Space Law from McGill University in Montreal, Canada in 1996. He has also served as the Staff Judge Advocate for Air Force Space Command. And of course, now in his current role as the Judge Advocate General of the United States Air Force, or Department of the Air Force, he has overseen the development of how the Air Force JAG Corps is going to be interacting with the new service branch of the Space Force. And so with that brief introduction, sir, I will turn it over to you. Welcome, General Rockwell. Thank you so much for being here with us today. And sir, the floor is yours.
Hey, Jeremy, thank you. And thanks for keeping that short too. I was going to cut you off if you didn't do that. Because here's what I want to do, folks. And first, let me start with the title of this webinar. I think it's awesome. I don't know who came up with this, but when you talk about law, technology, and warfare, it kind of captures who we are and what we do as a JAG Corps, period. And perhaps as Jeremy said, he called me old in a couple of nice words. And as I get closer to retirement, I start thinking about what the hell did I do for the last 30-some years? And I think I did law, technology, and warfare. The only thing I would probably throw back at you is that in the right order? Is it technology, warfare, and law? Is it technology, law, and warfare? Or do we have it right? As you guys know, I like to create false dilemmas just to wonder what drives what. I want to touch on what Jeremy mentioned in the introduction, which I think is important, because as we step back from this historically, and as we look at the last few years, I think the stand-up of a Space Force is going to be a seminal moment in our history, and I think it's kind of cool. If you noticed, we are the Judge Advocate General's Corps for the Department of the Air Force, and we never said that before. We always just said Air Force. I guess that's one way of fixing it when you talk about two forces, and we touch on, fundamentally, as the Department of the Air Force, we really are taking care of two forces, air and space. It's a little bit of a distractor to me, since I think in domains, that we're talking about space under the rubric or under the organization of a Department of the Air Force, which includes both of those, which I think gets into the discussion we had 3 years ago as we were standing up the Space Force. How do we do this from a JAG Corps perspective? I know some of you know, and I think we got a pretty good big group here, but I know I'm going to lose control of it pretty quickly. So I'm going to throw about a half a dozen things out on the table here, and then I'm going to probably watch you guys turn into a seminar real quickly, and we'll discuss what you want to discuss, because quite frankly, y'all are smarter on this stuff than I am, and I want to learn from you because you're the actual practicing lawyers. That gets into my first point, which it gets into the stand-up of the Space Force. I know most of you know when we set the Space Force up and the legislation rolled out, it was directly copied from the Marine Corps legislation as part of the Department of the Army. And I thought it was pretty impressive because, being concerned only about the law sometimes, I thought it was neat that the legislation rolled out and said there will be a Chief of Staff of the Space Force, which of course now is the CSO, which I think was a good move, going from Chief of Staff to CSO, which was more the Navy model. There will be a Vice Chief of Staff of the Space Force, or a Vice CSO. And the third part of legislation was there will be a judge advocate general to the Space Force. I thought that's pretty cool. Man, we're important. But then it got us thinking of how we should support two forces, and should we set up a separate JAG Corps to take care of air and space. And this really drove a lot of our thinking, or perhaps a lot of our confirmation in the JAG Corps flight plan, how we basically organized national security law around three fundamental legal domains, right? Criminal law, civil law, international law, or military justice and discipline in one area, JAJ, if you will, civil law and litigation in another, in the green, in the JAC, and then international ops. Space for us in our parlance has always fallen under international ops to some people, but not really. It cuts across everything that we do. So under this rubric of national security law with three fundamental domains, it made us think, okay, if that's the way we're organized, can we take care of two forces? Or do we create a whole separate JAG Corps that's going to do one for air and one for space? And fundamentally, that drove us to thinking about, do we organize by attaching ourselves to a bureaucracy or an organizational chart? Or do we think in terms of organizing ourselves around legal domains, national security law domains? I carried some baggage into this because I already thought the best way for us to organize is around legal domains. So for me, it was tailoring to both. And of course, there was some pretty good debate on how we do this. Ultimately, you see how it panned out. And so far, General Raymond's kind of happy with the way it is. He's good with us thinking in terms of three domains and taking care of two forces. And I've yet to run into a situation where General Brown and General Raymond kind of got at odds with each other. So it's worked so far. The other thing that space has driven us to, in law, technology, and warfare, and the way we think about space and cyber, is no kidding these three operational legal domains, and keeping it simple like that, and not getting bureaucratic or acronymic with our office symbols as much as this defending and exploiting and evolving national security law in each one of those domains. The interesting thing about space to me was that it came out wanting to be an agile, lean force, right? The General Raymond's, this was his marching orders going into it. And it's no different when with the COCOM that the component takes care of and supports. It's no different than General Brown's Action Order B, bureaucracy, and how do we streamline, and how do we get faster, and how do we operate at the speed of relevance. So I think that kind of helps us as a JAG Corps take care of two forces, as long as we think in terms of civil law, criminal law, and international and operations law. The interesting part about this, as space evolves more and cyber evolves more, is what you guys do. Why is that effective? Why does that work? Because we are practicing national security lawyers and paralegals in those areas. And I think it's important to think of it in terms of that, because that's the type of law, the national security law, that's the type of thinking, that's the type of defense, that's the type of threat with these soft targets, I think, that we're confronting these days as we look at what our adversaries are doing. And predominantly as we look at what's kind of rolling out in front of us with Ukraine, and then some of the security concerns with Taiwan and in the Indo-Pacific. Which leads me to my third point that I'll throw out to you guys before I totally lose control and want to turn this into a seminar discussion. This tension on Goldwater Nichols, if you will, this supporting command relationship, if you will. Space is interesting when you compare it to the other COCOM component relationships, whether that be a functional command or a geographic command. And I think it comes down to this. The folks at U.S. Space Command will probably confirm this or perhaps add to it or have a difference of opinion. But as I talk to General Raymond and General Thompson, and I hear some of the discussions with Spacecom and Space Force, is this slowly getting used to being in space a supported command, not a supporting. Space is really good at being a supporting command. I've been doing it for decades now. That was our focus when I was at Space Command. You know, how do we support the domain? How do we support the other comms? As we stand up a Space Force based on the threat, as we stand up a Space Command based on the threat, again, a Space Command yet again, we had one before, but the threat is coming mainly from competitors, and it's coming from not just a military threat, but a commercial. I won't call it a threat, but an opportunity. And all these elements of national power and how space is evolving to where we're turning into not just being the only operator up there, which others have been for a while. And when I say others, not just military, not just state, but also commercial. But I truly believe that the advent of the rocket and the ability to launch a satellite in space, that somehow the commercial industry figured out how to do a lot better than we do, changed the nature of this and made space much more like the sea and the law of the sea. And for us as a nation, protecting those sea lines of communication or space lines of communication or freedom of navigation for, let's face it, folks, what we are, a democracy based on capitalism. And you can see the capitalistic value that is in space now that has been commercialized. And that, of course, turns space command, space generally, the Space Force, as thinking in more in terms of being a supported geographic commander or functional commander, however you guys want to argue it. I think it's both. I think it's geography because it's spatial, and I think it's also functional because of what it does, which also highlights an interesting issue under Goldwater-Nichols, which is, does distinction even matter anymore? Or is it something from the 80s that the methods and means of warfare have changed so much that distinction, those Goldwater-Nichols distinctions of OT&E and combatant command even matter anymore? And I think space highlights that. I think cyber highlights that, because when you look at the structures, for instance, when you look at what the Space Force does to support the COM, Space Command, not just Space Command, but others, it's a 24/7 constant operation. And I have a hard time in space distinguishing between organized, train, and equip and combatant command responsibilities anymore, which fundamentally Goldwater-Nichols is set up under. So I think you guys live in a fascinating area because this happens at speed. And when you look at the COM, the component and the COM are almost interchangeable. So when you look at the Space Force and you look at U.S. Space Command, it's all the same people, it's all the same hats, it's all the same heads. So this dual hatting, triple hatting, quadruple hatting almost goes away because any distinction is operating at speed to sort itself out. And when you talk to guys like Todd Pennington at Space Command, you know, it's almost like he has to rifle through that at speed. And similar to all the field command SJAs out there and what you guys are doing in the componency piece to support Space Command, it's almost an irrelevant distinction anymore if we're going to operate at speed and do what we need to do to compete and take care of the national security of the states. And more importantly, which is my fourth point, I'm sorry, is this concept of integrated deterrence under the national security strategy and national defense strategy. I think space and cyber represents what that means. And when you talk about integrated deterrence, you're talking about integrating across all the operational domains: land, sea, air, space, cyber, and doing that at speed. You're talking about integrating across all instruments of national power, integrated deterrence across military power, economic power, and diplomatic power. and how that happens at speed. And the stovepiping that I grew up in, you guys are a lot cleaner in your thinking than I am, but I grew up in a very stovepipe, non-integrated world that somehow there was a great global integrator to all of this, either from a defense standpoint, from a joint standpoint, a coalition standpoint, more from a diplomatic standpoint or an interagency, intergovernmental approach. The neat thing about space is that technology and warfare has forced that to happen at speed naturally. And space has been integrating with business and the commercial enterprise long before anybody else was. They've been integrating across the interagency and long before anyone else was. I found that challenging when I got to Space Command because that's not the system I grew up under. But naturally, there's a natural partnership and an integrated defense type thinking in space that General Brown will tell you he's taking notes and watching. And when you talk about integrated deterrence across the services, across the commands, the COCOMs, if you will, across the interagency, and most importantly, across all instruments of national power, you see what our adversaries are doing and why this is so important. China doesn't have this bureaucratic problem. Russia does not have this bureaucratic problem. I'm not. It's a problem in a sense that we have to navigate it. It's not necessarily a weakness on our part, but it's something we have to navigate. Because at the end of the day, we have to do it at speed. Because at the end of the day, we're going to be better at it than they are because they're not as good at anything as we are. And I think that's something that we have to kind of get at, and that's both General Raymond and General Brown when they talk about action order B bureaucracy. How do we navigate that at speed and pull out the value across that? And with General Raymond, how do we do that from an agile force concept and jettison a lot of the stuff that keeps us busy and navigating, whereas it's not really a matter of law. It's more of a matter of policy or bureaucracy or organization that, quite frankly, gets in the way as we sort out authorities and what we can and can't do under the legal frameworks that we have set up. Fifth point. Looks like I'm at about 20 minutes. I'll do this quickly. Where do we need to go generally from here? My 2 cents, but you'll tell me if I'm wrong. When I went to McGill and I studied air and space law, it was interesting for a couple reasons. First semester was air, second semester was space. Okay, got it. Divided by domain, already started my thinking that way. Didn't really have much in terms of cyber. We had information operations, but not to the extent where it was here. But probably what I got out of McGill more than anything else was the student body. I don't know if it's still like this. I think it is. It's pretty close. There were 25 students in my class from 20 different countries. We were operating in a comparative law type environment. It was a fantastic group, and it's from all over the world. A couple Americans, a couple Canadians, and then everybody else was from everywhere, to include China. What we learned there, more importantly than anything than the substance of the law, was this comparative nature of the law and how each country approached the law. And so every day was a comparative law analysis in how folks approach things. When you talk about integrated deterrence, when we talk about this great global power competition, when we talk about what we need to do to compete, we have to go beyond what we've been doing. Like we have country law studies, right? Most of you see them, looked at them. Some of you even wrote them. Yeah, I mean, we have the foreign clearance guide that kind of lays out here's the rules in a foreign country, but we've never taken it to the next step of doing a comparative law analysis of how country X approaches the law, how they approach the law and look at the law to compete with us. We, of course, just mirror image and just assume they should be thinking like we do as a fundamental common law country, and the way we think is the way they should think. The way we rationalize is the way they do. And I think we have to evolve and develop these comparative law studies to take them to the level where we're actually understanding where they're coming from. And that may be just a negotiation, that may be just a competition, that may just be, an adversarial relationship, whatever that may be on the spectrum. But frankly, right now, we just learn the law as we know it and insist others look at the law that way. I think we got to take it to the step where we're getting inside their heads and understanding where they're coming from, whether that's for good or bad. And so what you're going to see come out, and I can't wait to see it from people in this group, you guys are probably going to be developing these comparative law studies so we can get into what's happening and what the threat environment looks like. You all know we're facing some I'll use the term lawfare, if you will, of what's going on. And frankly, I'm not a big fan of the term or what it means, because it makes it sound like that we are going to engage in behavior where we weaponize the law, similar to what some of our adversaries do when we look at fundamentally going to lose the law. But we do have to be more transparent on how we explain things and talk about things and actually agree to disagree or do what we do, debate principles and ideas and approaches, rather than demonizing other folks. Just say, well, here's where you're coming from and here's why, here's where we're coming from and here's why. We can agree to disagree, but this is going to be our approach. I think that's the level we got to take these comparative law studies to actually get inside other people's head. And I hearken back to my time at McGill, because we did that every day. And we had, again, 25 students from 20 different countries. And oh, by the way, the Americans didn't all think differently either, or didn't all think the same either. We thought totally differently. And we got down to what kind of lawyer you were, a civil coded or a common law lawyer. And that was an okay distinction too. I think my last point that I'll throw out on the table, because I know some of this group's working on it or have worked on it, with regard to the DoD norms that are coming out and are evolving, the McGill and the WUMRA space norms and standards of behavior, whatever we're calling them, and what's going to be our approach on those. I think fundamentally our approach is going to be to make international law and evolve the law more in terms of custom than treaty, which I think is important in our approach, which is important to us as practicing national security lawyers in space and in cyber and in air, and sometimes even on land and in sea, and probably have to reconcile that different approach to the law, because not everyone approaches the law like we do from a common law standpoint, from a custom and practice standpoint, rather than a proscriptive or prohibitive treaty type practice. And I think that's going to be an important point to lay out too, because at the end of the day, I think we as national security law professionals are going to have to explain those differences of why we take this approach, as people attack us of why we've taken that approach. I don't think we can ever do a good. I don't think we can ever do a good enough job explaining our approaches to the law and why it's important. We have to at least do that until we at least get to the point where we agree to disagree on things. All right, that's 30 minutes of drivel and spiel that I probably threw out there to you all to talk about whatever you guys want to talk about, because I'd love to hear what you're thinking in terms of airspace, cyber, land, sea, any operational domain, what's going on in the Ukraine, which I think is playing out right before our eyes, some of these principles that you guys have been dealing with. Is that a ground war, air war, space war, nuclear war? Depends on where it is on the continuum of conflict right now. But fascinating what you guys are doing. Let me hear about what you guys are thinking about and what you guys are working on. So get me current again. I'm kind of out of it. I live in the bureaucracy.
Well, sir, thank you so much for those introductory remarks. Really appreciate it. And we do have questions and comments flowing into our chat boxes. First question, sir, is from Mr. Philip Dragata. He has a question on your fourth point regarding integrative deterrence. And so what he asks is, on your fourth point, sir, as your teams across the COCOMs and the JAG teams operate together, how do you enable a collaborative teamwork environment without sacrificing the innovation and the uniqueness of the Space Force? How do you navigate those issues, as you said, at speed?
Yeah, I apologize for telling Phil, if you have heard this already, you're going to hear it again, and I'm going to keep preaching it until I die. It's a knowledge management platform that allows for integrated teams to come together to bring the three areas of national security law together that reflects functioning in the operational domain of space. And, a lot of BS words, right? But no, really, we've never been able to operate on a knowledge management platform to where we can pull. The JAG core is brilliant. Except for the person sitting at the table here. The folks in the JAG core are freaking brilliant, but we've never figured out a way to integrate them. This is a huge step. Think about it. 3 years ago, we would not be doing this, where you have 50, 60 some people on a webinar where we're actually having a seminar where we can discuss. And all 60 of these people have something to offer as a civil law lawyer, as a military justice and discipline lawyer, as an international and ops lawyer. The interesting part about this group is they're very conversant in the operational domain of space. So they've mastered the mission and facts, which is an integration in and of itself. Mission and facts in space, that operational domain, integrating with those three areas of the law. And now you see the strength of integrated deterrence if we get this right, and creating a knowledge management platform where we can actually pull this all together. Anything that happens in a successful organization happens because of integrated teams, not individuals. And the more you can integrate into that, the more you can get the right answer at speed. And this is why integrated deterrence, the concept might sound like, I don't know, deterrence, nukes. No, it's integrating everything across all elements of national power and all power in an organization to include the legal part, the core, the JAG core, if you will. And then if we really did this right, I think we would have half a dozen operators listening in also, right? Because you're integrating law with operations. It's a concept that has to get us past ourselves, which is lawyers tend to derive themselves from what they have in their head and how smart they are, right? How do you mine that? How do you pull that together? You integrate the team and you talk about it, and you upload this knowledge, you siphon this knowledge on a knowledge management platform. And more importantly, you allow people to pull from it. And it's not just a top down or bottom up. It's a constant ability to integrate at speed to advise the command and what they're trying to do. So I think the KM platform that we're developing to really get into the knowledge that we have historically and then currently across the JAG core is the key to this. We've just taken integrated deterrence and we've taken it to integrating the law and integrating the interagency and integrating everything we do as one team. And it's not limited to air and space or cyber. It's military justice and discipline, and it's civil law. Because I will tell you, our greatest national security lawyers these days and paralegals are practicing in the civil law arena, and they are advancing applications, and they are advancing the procurement of things at speed, which is what's more important to us than straight hardware these days. So Phil, it's what's been driving me the last couple of years of setting up this knowledge management platform that doesn't wait for me to share with you what I think and all this wisdom, which I don't have any number one anymore. You do. And we have to also start pulling from the folks working the issue on the ground and giving them a platform, a place to play where we can help them as they help us, and we bring it all together, and then we integrate that across the mission sets. This is one step forward when you talk about these webinars. This is how we have to do everything. So I don't know if you guys are a fan of Teams. I am. Microsoft Teams, I don't care what it is. I don't care if it's Zoom, Microsoft Teams, but the air staff, believe it or not, is actually going to Microsoft Teams on how we do meetings and make decisions, which is more important than have meetings. And we do it on the spot. So bring the person to the meeting with the authority to weigh in to help the decision maker and the decisions made. That's how we compete at speed, at a speed of relevance. Good question. Let me know when you finally figure it out, okay? Because it ain't going to happen in my lifetime, but it's going to happen soon. And it'll probably be in the next couple of years where we lay out this KM platform that takes the place of flight, which is a pain in the butt, because it's just, we pound our chest when we brag about making flight Googleable. That's cute, but that's not where it needs to be. You need to be able to access those databases and access the brilliance of the space lawyers on this group, or whatever kind of lawyer you are, that then also accesses the civil frameworks we have, and the discipline and the smart things and the innovative things people are doing out there. And it's the same way with justice too. Over.
Thank you, sir. Next question is a little bit kind of on the practical side. We have an anonymous question. The question is, sir, given our roles in both the Air Force and the Space Force, what can young JAGs do to best prepare themselves to serve both domains? And for example, this person goes on kind of specifically asking maybe what courses should they focus on, what areas of law should they particularly study, should they wait until they are assigned to a particular job before diving in? What is your advice to this young JAG, sir?
Yeah, it's a great question, because I think it's how we approach the law in the Air Force. We encourage generalists, not subject matter experts, and that's a bit of an incorrect phrase, because how do we grow generalists? By making them subject matter experts in 2 to 3 year spurts. So when you talk to the JAGs in front of you, or the paralegals in front of you, we throw you in a civil law pot and say, be the expert on that. And then as soon as you are, we pull you out of there. Then we throw you in a military justice and discipline pool, if you will. You get good at it, and then, damn, as soon as I get good at this, they pull me out and make me go do something else. And then ultimately, every young JAG and paralegal wants to do international ops and air and space. And I don't blame them, or international, or national security, or whatever we call it. And I don't blame them one bit, because it is kind of cool. But you throw them in that pot. Over a career, you notice that, whoa, I've been thrown in about 12 different pools. For those of you who've been in Germany, it's a German BOD system. If you've ever been through a German bath, they throw you in 12 baths in the span of 2 hours, and it's really uncomfortable until you get out the back end, but you realize, man, I feel pretty good. That's what we're trying to develop, a generalist who gets to be a generalist by being able to function on their feet in all those different pools of law. Here's what's happening, though, I think, and I think this is fundamental understanding to your question, or at least what I think. I may be wrong. In each one of those pools, what are you doing? You're mastering facts. You're mastering mission. You're mastering operational domain. So when your question leads with, how do we take care of space and air? Oh, by the way, it's land, it's sea, because most of our issues that we deal with happen on land and over sea. Really, when you think about this, when you're at a wing office or a garrison office or a delta, you're really going in all the integrated domains, if you will, which is fundamental behind JADC2, right? Joint all domain command and control. So it's a bit of an anomaly, or a bit of a red herring to say it's just space and air, because it's land, sea, air, space, and cyber when you think about it. But what's fundamental to this, how do you make a good lawyer? How do you make a good common law lawyer? Somebody who can think on their feet and quickly assimilate facts and mission to apply to those 3 legal areas, whether those facts and mission are being driven from the space domain, the air domain, the land domain, the sea domain, or the cyber domain, which is another interesting discussion if you guys want to get into, because I don't think cyber is a domain, at least in my small brain. So that's how we develop good JAGs. Be ready to be thrown in a domain you've never even thought you'd be thrown into, whether it's an operational one or a geographic one. Because where we're going is, I don't know where we're going to push force in the future. I don't know where any of you guys are going to be. You could be in Indo-PACOM, you could be in the Middle East, you could be in Eastern Europe, you could be in, in Eastern Poland, or quite frankly, you could be in the Ukraine. Even if you're a space support lawyer, because there's still, of course, a ground component to that. So it's getting comfortable with not knowing what the mission is, being comfortable enough with the law piece of it in all three of those legal domains to be thrown into that mission set without getting overly enamored with the facts of the mission set. You got to master them for what's in front of you, but it's really the critical analysis in the law of those facts and mission that gets you to workable COAs at speed for the decision maker. And I'll finish with this. Some of our best lawyers are experts in X law. Unfortunately, some of our worst lawyers are experts in X law, and I'll use X because I don't want to create a fight out there. And why that is they're so expert in the law that they're missing the forest for the trees, which are the facts and the mission. We grow you by throwing a case at you, for instance. I'll throw you in a courtroom. Why is courtroom work so important? Because it's not much different than working in a AOC or a KOC or a space OC. It really isn't. It is getting a bunch of information at speed, sorting that information, critically analyzing it, then advising what the law says, not leading with the law, which is why I started out with, you sure we got this in the right order? Law, technology, and warfare. I think law comes after the mastery of the facts, which we have to do at speed. And that's what you do, regardless of whether you're in airspace, cyber, land, or sea. And this is, and I'll finish with this because I think I'm going to ask you to solve this as a young JAG, and I'm assuming you're a young JAG who wants to remain anonymous. You shouldn't, because it's a good damn question, and you should be patted on the back for it. How do we use artificial intelligence to master the mission and facts at speed, so we can immediately get to that critical analysis as we get into the law and analyze it with the law? I think this is our Achilles heel. Our inability to get to relevance, weight, and credibility of those facts and do that at speed, so we can actually look at legal options to do that. We don't like artificial intelligence. We like to do it ourselves. We like to sort the information in our own heads. Maybe not you as much as me, but I tell you what, I have to read every page. I have to go through everything. And we're kind of taught that way. Otherwise, it's malpractice, or we'll miss something and we'll lose the case, or we'll miss the issue and not get the right answer. But we have to get more comfortable at sorting information at speed. And this is where the big data comes in. This is where we're really leaning on you guys in space and cyber and at cutting edge of innovation to teach us how to do that at speed. Because I do it at speed now because I'm not smart, but I've been doing it a long time. But guess what? That ain't fast enough. And so I think we're at a turning point right now in how we practice law. And I think that turning point is based on how we use artificial intelligence and discovery and sorting of information to get to the truth of the matter sooner as we run it through legal principles. So, great question. Thanks.
Next question, sir, is from Major Edwin Kissiel. Major Kissiel asks, noting your discussion on comparative law studies, what do you believe are the most needed legal research areas for space?
So, hey, Major Kissiel, that's a good question, because I think you just laid out space versus air and land. So when you think about this, when you think about concepts in the air of agile combat employment, as we get away from big, fat, juicy air-based targets, and we get more to just these forward deployed ACE concepts, agile combat employment, flying airplanes off of dirt strips or places we never thought we'd be flying out of, or off of a civilian runway, you realize the comparative law studies that are required based on geographic country and country sovereignty. how are we going to buy things from Poland on the ground when we're trying to launch things off of a commercial airstrip there? So from an air standpoint, I think you have to develop more of those country to country type um, ways of looking at things from a civil law standpoint and from a justice standpoint. That's not to say the more the international and ops stuff isn't important, because in space, I think you elevate that because space has never been geographic when you think about it. And this is why I think it's more of a functional way of thinking than geographic, even though space is spatial and we're occupying it. But when you look at it this way, I think the space folks need to look more in terms of how does China approach space? How does Russia approach space? Iran, North Korea. And perhaps just as importantly, if not more, is how do our allies and partners look at space? And so now you have a reconciliation of legal frameworks to regulate behavior in space. So I think it transcends in space more just, hey man, I need water and parts and all that stuff from country X in Eastern Europe or in a Pacific island state, to where you're doing comparative law studies on how we approach the law from more of a use of force and partnering, more of an international law approach. And I think we have to get a better understanding of our allies and partners of how they approach the law. When you look at this, do a comparative analysis, for instance, between the European Space Agency and the way we approach the law when we look at things. They're commercial, both air and space, and then how we look at it. We do not have a firm understanding of their approach to law when I talk about comparative law studies. And too often, we tend to mirror image and dictate to them, this is how you should approach the law. That doesn't get us where we need to get. That doesn't get us to agree to disagree or reconcile our differences in our approach towards law, whether that's norms of behavior or buying. More importantly than that, though, the mirror image of us on our adversaries is even more dangerous because we're missing the threat. We will try to predict what somebody else is doing based on how we think they should react rather than knowing how they're going to react. And this is something we have to fundamentally get over. And in the law, I think, as we look at the way we approach the law, we get mad at people for not approaching it the way we do rather than explaining this is the way we approach it. This is the way you approach it. How do you reconcile that or blunt it if it is an adversary? I think that's the fundamental nature of how we have to look at comparative law studies across the board. And oh, by the way, the ACE concept in the Air Force, you know where that came from? Space, right? Why? A few years ago, you had some of the leaders in space talk about disaggregated satellites because they were big, fat, juicy targets. Because we had these big honking satellites, and rather having a disaggregated capability across a bunch of small satellites at low Earth orbit, for instance, rather than GEO, that we got to the point where we can't have these big fat targets, which is a lot like the bases we have, which are big fat targets. So this disaggregation really kind of comes together, that is driving a lot of this integrated deterrence type thinking. So it's a good question. I think it wasn't a question as much as it was an observation. But you guys know we got to get into the heads of the people we're dealing with, not just from an ally and partner standpoint, which is integrated deterrence, but also from an adversarial way of thinking. Has anybody out there read Chinese doctrine? Has anybody out there read how China approaches things from an integrated deterrence standpoint themselves, or integrating economics with military, with diplomacy? Belt and Road. Anybody read that? Anybody read the long-term way they approach things and look at things? How about lawfare? Has anybody approached or read how China in their strategic documents think about hard targets and soft targets at the same time? And I throw that out there, I won't make you raise hands, but I'll raise mine. No, I haven't read it to the extent that it needs to be read. You can't do a comparative law study until you look at the way they look at things. And then, like every good lawyer, every good paralegal, what do we do? Well, it's a chess game. Well, if you do that, then we're going to do this. And you take it, you truly do. When you understand where they're coming from, you can actually get to chess rather than checkers, which is reactive. So we all, from a comparative law study standpoint, not only do we have to read their doctrine, which is their soft law, but how they approach the law and understand that reconciliation for our commanders. We're doing it. We have to do it a bit more so we can get to a bit more transparency. A lot of this also, by the way, is what's behind General Raymond's and all the chiefs, actually, but General Raymond probably more than anybody about the declassification of things. If we don't declassify what the threat is, no one will know what the threat is. And we, the military, we, the bureaucracy, we sometimes the Jags, because we're a bit risk adverse, will overprotect threat information. And then we wonder why nobody understands where we're coming from. I think this is something we got to address too a little bit more and dig a little deeper. But again, that gets into the comparative law studies, Ed, and I think it's critical that we take it past the foreign clearance guide. And I think it's your future, all of you, is going to be working with your allies and partners, is going to be writing the Woomera manual and writing the McGill manual, even though most of you rather do Woomera than McGill. I got that. It's going to be what we used to do a little bit more of. It's going to be going and talking about things with the ICRC, the International Committee of the Red Cross. Whether we agree or disagree, it's getting into those environments and debating, because guess what? Debating is much better than the alternative, which feels like Ukraine these days, doesn't it?
Wonderful. Well, sir, we have both a comment and a question from Colonel Pennington. Question relates a little bit to what you were just mentioning, especially with respect to the Chinese, but I'll give you the comment first. Colonel Pennington says, sir, great words about Space Force and Space Command relations. Our DCOM has described the U.S. Space Force and U.S. Space Command as, quote, binary star systems unique in the Goldwater-Nichols constellation. Comment from Colonel Pennington.
I love it. That's perfect. I'm stealing that.
Now, Colonel Pennington's question, sir, is China's activities in the South China Sea have flaunted international law, international norms, become a major focus of competition in the Indo-Pacific theater. Do you have any thoughts on how the U.S. and our allies and partners can get ahead of a similar competition in orbit and on the moon?
Yeah, integrated deterrence. Simple. And I always appreciate. I wish I would have known Colonel Pennington was online. I didn't know. I would have said something really bad about him just because we threw him into schizophrenia, making him be the component and now the comm SJA. So that's perfect. It didn't work. He somehow figured out how to navigate it. It's easy question. Integrated deterrence, and deterrence by definition is early messaging. Again, and messaging is important there. And if we overclassify things in space, we can't message. The fundamental concept behind deterrence, whether it's nuclear or integrated or whatever, is messaging to an adversary, you better not do this. How do you message when you overclassify? So that's the important part of that. But as you integrate deterrence, you message very loud and clearly across all elements of national power. Back to Colonel Pennington's comment, which is spot on, and I love the quote. Space, by definition, has never thought geographically. You guys always have to remember under Goldwater-Nichols. I mean, I got it. Geography still matters. What happens on the ground matters. State sovereignty matters. But it's integrated deterrence across the world, not a pivot to Indo-PACOM, not a pivot now back to EUCOM or AFRICOM, or not a pivot to SouthCom because of what's going on the border. The world has changed dramatically, and the beauty of space is you think differently. And by the way, so does air. Air is never comfortable being assigned to a geographic combatant commander. Navy isn't either. So you guys always have to remind us, and cyber even to another level, that no, this isn't an Indo-PACOM issue. This isn't a UCOM issue, because when you juxtapose Taiwan against Ukraine, you realize, hell, it's the same thing. When you look at the allies and partnering that's going on the other side of things, and yeah, there's an ally or partnership, or at least a watching of what's going on as alliances happen and naturally have over time. So the question is, I think it's integrated. I think the answer to the question is it's a focus on integrated deterrence across geographic commands, functional commands, instruments of national power, and always think that way. If we just focus on, this skirmish over here as opposed to that one, we miss what our adversaries are doing, which is looking at everything as more like an integrated grid. And we chase the shiny penny or the squirrel sometimes, and we have to always back up from that, and think like space operators do, and cyber operators do, and air operators do, which is across all domains to include land and sea, which makes our Navy and Army counterparts nervous. And we're not even talking the literals with the Marine zone. We also have to think like lawyers think. And when you think about 3 legal domains, they're not geographic, they're legal domains. So integrated deterrence with regard to the law has nothing to do with geography, even though we have to master the local geography. But at the end of the day, we got to pull it back to the strategic. And Colonel Pennington's point's getting into what the last couple chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff has discussed. Who's the global integrator for us? Nobody. There isn't one. I mean, that's the strength of our system, our checks and balance system. We don't have a CCP. We don't have a party or an apparatus that does all this. We're a country based on constitutional checks and balances. So who globally integrates integrated deterrence? Let me know when you figure it out. I think the answer is 3 branches of government, an executive, a Department of Defense. Is it the chairman? Is it the COCOMs? We get lost in those weeds, but I think it's the entire apparatus of our rule of law structured system that integrates all that. That's big stuff, man. No wonder we're slow, huh? How do we integrate? How do we check and balance at speed? I think it gets back to Phil's question, which is that integrated team sorting out an issue, a tactical issue, that integrated team sorting out at a pretty high strategic level. And now the real question is, how do we do that without ripping each other apart? Which, kind of hurts sometimes when you look at what's driving wedges in the country sometimes. And where we go from debate to debating principles to attacking other people in personam ad hominem attacks. And I think that's the other thing that we as legal professionals have to step up and call that out. You're not debating a principle or an issue. You're making an ad hominem in personam attack on somebody. That's a different area, but you guys all know what we do in civility and how we do our jobs. Okay, back over to you. We got time for one more, or however many. Hey, Jeremy, I can do this all day, man. I know you guys wouldn't like that, but this is awesome for me. I miss dealing with you guys.
Sir, I can tell you that at least here at LitWork, we have as much time as you do. So if you're willing to take a couple more questions. You a real job, yeah. I mean, I'm extremely busy. So no, just kidding. Sir, just since we do probably only have a limited time for additional questions, there is one here in the chat box that I think a number of people would be particularly interested in. This question comes from Major Amy Sfara in JAO. And what she asks is, given that you are the first ever US Air Force TJAG to experience the historical stand-up of a brand new military service, do you have any takeaways or reflections about this experience that you would like to share?
Yeah. Amy, why don't you come down here and ask me that? Why you got to ask me in front of everybody? Why you got to be that way? Here's my takeaway. And Amy knows this well because I constantly give her crap about this. If we focus on not the organization and not the acronym, and more on the effect we're trying to have in an operational domain. In this case, space. We get it right. When we look at the domain of space and what we're trying to do, defend and exploit it. I don't like to use the term exploit, but that's what we do. We defend the domain for national security. We exploit the domain. No different than what others are doing there from a business standpoint. Businesses defend their market share and exploit the domain to make more money, and that's okay. We, from a national security standpoint, defend and exploit the domain, which is okay. And then we evolve national security law in that domain in those three areas to defend and exploit the domain better for the national security and national defense of the country. Pretty cool what we get to do. That's the focus we need to be on. Here's where we lose the plot in the stand-up of a service. And this is something that Amy and the space folks in JAO try to fight against, because General Raymond's trying to fight against it. As we set up an agile force, we tend to grab baggage from the Air Force. We got a clean slate. And I've heard that several times from the boss. We got a clean slate here. So don't take baggage from the Air Force that we don't want. So when we focus on bureaucracy, org charts, and acronyms, we lose the plot of, all right, I got the acronym, I got the org chart, I got all that, but what the heck are we trying to do to defend and exploit the domain to evolve national security and national security law? And so that break, you have to constantly fight against it. And it's the bureaucratic, acronymical approach towards things. And space is horrible at it, right, Amy? My God, they've created a whole set of new office symbols that they expect everybody to learn. And then they just spout them out like everybody should know what they are. And we lose the plot of, what are you trying to do, man? What are we trying to do based on the threat or the protection of the sea lines of communication or whatever we're trying to do? And then we create a bureaucracy and a structure that just swallows the effect we're trying to have in a domain to defend and exploit it. That's my biggest takeaway. And it's amazing how we as legal professionals tend to facilitate that a little bit, because as lawyers and paralegals, we set up frameworks that require an organizational structure and an organizational framework to regulate behavior. And then we focus more on the organizational structure and the regulatory structure that regulates behavior rather than the behavior. And that's why I punish anybody who uses an acronym. And I'll buy all of you a beer if I used an acronym in this. I know I did, but I need constant policing. But we have to get away from the bureaucracy and the acronyms and look at what we're trying to do. So when I ask you guys what you do, if you say I work in the Spock, I just laugh at you. I didn't ask you where you worked or what your bureaucratic office symbol was. I ask you, what are you doing to defend and exploit space to evolve national security law for the good of the country? That's your job. That's law, technology, and warfare. Hopefully we never get to warfare. And we won't get to warfare if we use the technology to develop the law and national security law. So that, Amy, that's my biggest takeaway. And I know you probably heard that nonsense from me before. And the other nonsense is that I give crap for, and Amy handles as well, is a restrictive reading of treaties and custom. So anytime we take a very restrictive reading of treaty and custom, as she well knows, I think we are not recognizing the fact that things are new in space. And we got to let mission and facts drive a restrictive or proscriptive reading of a treaty application. I'm not a fan of violating the law. I'm not a fan of even challenging it too much, but I do like to challenge it based on innovation and practice. And when you step back from this, we don't have a whole lot of practice in space. Yeah, we've been doing it for 50, 70 years. I got it, but not to the extent where all the legal parts and pieces are being affected, and then we need to evolve the law. So I don't even want to talk law or what the treaty says until I know what we're doing. Another reason why we got to declassify a lot of stuff. not to help the lawyers, don't get me wrong, but more for a deterrence standpoint. But mission and facts need to drive law, and that's where we are in space and cyber right now. And these are new methods and means of warfare, if you will. Something that treaties, in very rare circumstances, like nuclear arms treaties, like that regulate nukes, really don't have a place right now in space, other than those weapons of mass destruction. The law has to evolve through innovative practices and good intent of humankind. I firmly believe that, and so we should let it evolve and check and balance it as it does. Those are my big takeaways from space. But I will throw a third thing in, because I want to throw it out to you. You guys are empowered to do that. You guys need to understand and know that. Feel free to take those types of risk, to really go into areas that, man, I better ask first. Maybe not. You know when you're crossing the line. But what you don't want to do, if we don't want to slow down, I'm sorry, is feel empowered to take risk, and feel empowered in an area that, we don't know exactly what's going to be in that black hole once we go into it. But charge right into it smartly, and know that, your training is going to allow you to figure it out. And you're tied at the hip with a commander whose training is going to help him or her figure it out too. Pretty cool what we get to do. But don't ever feel like you got to ask Mother May I by anybody in your chain of command. And if we get this knowledge management platform right, they'll be able to interject at real time, to where some of the more senior leaders on this call can chime in and help you get there. But it's a collective, integrated effort, that's for sure. Hey, I'll let you guys go. Okay, I know y'all do get back to work. Other than Jeremy, he doesn't have a job, but I know the rest of you got things to do. I truly, truly appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys. This is the most invigorated I've been in a long time, because I get to relive what I used to argue about all the time, in a totally different world with totally different methods and means. Man, I can't wait to see what you guys are going to do as you develop more in space and cyber, and develop national security law. Know that you're doing it. Know that your actions are doing it. Know that you are the actual practicing lawyers and paralegals in this domain, and know how jealous people are of that. And I don't mean to say that in a bad way. I get calls all the time from other countries. I get calls all the time from the interagency saying, can you give me a good space JAG or a cyber JAG or an air JAG that can help us work through this? And the reason they ask is because they're not practicing national security lawyers. So my answer to them is, I'm going to give you a good national security lawyer or paralegal who is conversant in the space domain or the cyber domain or the air domain or whatever domain you have. But know that you got something that a lot of people don't have. And that's why you're asked to participate in these interagency things, in these international discussions on norms of behavior, because you get to do something that a lot of folks don't get to do, which is actually practice in the domain as a national security lawyer or paralegal. So I want to thank you all for what you do. Thanks for letting me take your time. Thanks for the discussion. I wrote a few things down because I'm serious. I did learn some stuff for you because I'm out of touch from you. So I truly, truly appreciate it. And we'll definitely take your input. And how do we make the JAG Corps better to let you guys do what you need to do? Appreciate it again. Out of here. Have a great weekend.